Today's lesson is the return of the wolf. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about the wolf, or wolves in the plural.
Whoa, is there a wolf in here?
I don't know if there are any wolves in Taiwan. Maybe they have one in the zoo or something like that.
I just heard one. That was so realistic.
Kind of interesting. Yeah, I think other people could do better than that. But in any case, a wolf is like a big dog, and it's kind of dangerous. You don't want to run into a wolf. And, of course, there are wolves all over the world, but we're talking specifically about wolves in Yellowstone National Park, which is in the United States. I guess they didn't have so many wolves there in the past, and they were going extinct, or their numbers were getting smaller and smaller, but I guess they've reintroduced them, and now they are thriving.
Absolutely, yeah. Hunters had killed many of the wolves. I don't know if there were actually any left living out in certain wild areas in America, so they decided that this would be a good thing to bring back in. They have better ways of tracking the animals, better ways of controlling the population, and of course probably fewer farmers generally in the area than they would have had 50 or 100 years ago. So why not to see how this works, right? Because as human activity starts to squeeze natural areas and squeeze the animals out of them, it would be good to know ways of reintroducing the animals so we can do it hopefully in the future so that we don't lose these animals, or we only find them living in zoos and places like that, and we would lose them living in their natural habitat. So let's find out how you return a wolf to the wild. The return of the wolf. Yellowstone National Park, located in the northwest United States, is a vast area of natural beauty. Before the 20th century, it was home to hundreds of gray wolves. However, due to extreme hunting, wolves had completely disappeared from the park by 1926. In 1995, after gray wolves were classified as an endangered species, scientists decided to reintroduce them to Yellowstone, and what happened next surprised everyone.
大家好，第一部分介绍形容词 vast， 它的意思是广大的、巨大的。例如 The farmer left his herd of cattle to graze on vast empty fields. 牧场主人让他的牛群在广大空旷的原野上吃草。或者 The vast ocean stretched as far as the eye could see. 这片广阔的海洋一望无际。下一个看到这个动词 classify， 表示将点点点分类归类。例如 In the study, the scientists classified people by age. 在这项研究中，科学家依年龄将人分类。或是The librarian helped classify the new books according to their genres. 图书馆员帮忙依新书的类型将其分类。接着看到形容词 endangered， 指濒临灭绝的、有危险的。例如 The forest is home to an endangered species of bird. 这座森林是一种濒临绝种鸟类的栖地。也可以说 The charity tries to protect endangered animals. 这个慈善机构努力保护濒绝动物。
Okay, so again, we're returning wolves to the wild, and of course, we're talking about the return of the wolf. They're back in larger numbers, and they're here to stay, hopefully. Here in Yellowstone National Park, located in the northwest United States, we have a vast area of natural beauty. Maybe some of you have been there before. I've been there twice. I went there on a family trip when I was maybe about 10 years old, and then again many years later with my wife and daughter. That was, about 10 years ago or so. And Yellowstone, of course, is in the state of Wyoming, out in the western United States. Wyoming doesn't really have a lot of people in it, but it does have Yellowstone, and lots of people like to go there for its hot springs and the Old Faithful Geyser and the buffalo and the wolves.
There you go, and much, much more, because it is a vast or huge area of natural beauty. I would bet it's bigger than Da'an Park here in Taipei City. No, it's very, very, very big. Before, it says the 20th century, Yellowstone National Park and that area, it was home to hundreds of gray wolves. So this is back before there were a lot of people there, back before the highways and cities and towns and all that kind of stuff, and farms. So back 100 years ago or more, Yellowstone and the area area was home to, or was where hundreds of gray wolves made their homes. That's where you could find them. That's where they lived naturally and had been living there for thousands of years up to that point. However, due to extreme hunting, wolves had completely disappeared from the park by 1926. Yes, as Americans sort of expanded westwards and started to use that land and turn what was once wild countryside into farms and stuff, the animals suffered. Both the bison, the big buffalo, they suffered as they were hunted almost to extinction. And the wolves, too, because as the buffalo and the bison were replaced, farmers and ranchers would bring in cattle and sheep and things like that. And wolves love to eat cattle and sheep, especially compared to a big, dangerous buffalo. So these wolves would often be hunting the animals that the farmers were trying to raise, and the farmers had guns, and so the wolves ended up losing that argument. The farmers would kill the wolves so that wolves wouldn't hunt their livestock, their animals. And there were, I'm sure, other reasons, people just going out to hunt for fun. But anyways, so wolves by about 1926 had disappeared. The hundreds of gray wolves that used to live around Yellowstone were no more, and that lasted for a very long time until there was a new thinking about this back in the 1990s. So what changed?
Well, in 1995, that's about 30 years ago, after gray wolves were classified as an endangered species, scientists decided to reintroduce them to Yellowstone. And what happened next surprised everyone. So they did not go extinct yet, but they were endangered, which means they're close to going extinct. They're almost totally gone. So that's how you classify these things. If you do research on animals on the internet, sometimes you get the conservation status of these animals. They'll say whether it's least concern or threatened or extinct. There are different levels. And here they were classified or put into a category, and that category was endangered. Okay, so they're in trouble. If we don't do something about it, they may go extinct. They may totally disappear.
Absolutely. And of course, this is a species of wolf. There are many types of wolves, gray wolves, white wolves, Arctic wolves. There are different types of wolves, and the same that there are different types of big cats or different types of sharks and things like that. And wolves in other parts of the world might be doing fine, but in this area, in Yellowstone and sort of the northwestern states of the U.S., around Wyoming, they were in big trouble. They were endangered. So scientists decided to reintroduce them to Yellowstone. They decided to bring in populations of wolves from outside. I think actually they were Canadian wolves. They brought them from Alberta, British Columbia, places like that, which has a very similar climate, very similar geography and terrain. So they brought them back into Yellowstone, and what happened next surprised everyone. I think they started with a small family pack of 8 or 10 wolves or something like that, and they just wanted to see, will they breed? Will they make themselves a happy home? Will they find food? Will they not bother people and end up being hunted again? Let's see how this goes. And apparently what happened was a surprise, and let's hope it's a good surprise. We're going to find out in the next part of the article. The wolves began hunting the park's large deer population. Without natural predators, the deer had previously roamed freely, eating to their heart's content and causing a huge decline in plant life. With the wolves' return, however, the deer were forced to avoid certain areas. As a result, plants had a chance to recover. As trees and bushes returned, so did birds and beavers. The latter rely on plant materials in building dams, which also provide homes for many other river creatures. The new plant growth also stabilized the riverbanks and reduced soil erosion.
第二部分介绍动词 roam 表示漫步漫游。我们可以说 Tourists roam the city streets, exploring the various shops and cafes. 游客漫步城市街道，探索各式商店和咖啡馆。又或者说Vast herds of bison once roamed the prairies. 曾有大群野牛漫步在大草原上。
Okay, so here's the next part of the article, and we'll talk about that surprise. They weren't really expecting what happened. So here's what happened. Again, it's kind of complicated. The wolves began hunting the park's large deer population. This is probably true in both the United States and Canada. There are just too many deer there. We have a problem with deer walking in the roads, and sometimes people run into them because you don't expect to see a deer there. So yeah, deer are quite large in number in North America. And yes, Yellowstone has a large deer population, or at least it did before the wolves came. And yes, the wolves started hunting all that deer. The wolves went after them and cut them down and chomped into them. And you can expect that as a result, the wolves began to reproduce.
Absolutely. The wolf population would be supported by having that food source. And what about the deer population? Well, obviously, it might shrink a little bit, but that turned out to be a very, very good thing. It says, without natural predators, the deer had previously roamed freely, eating to their heart's content and causing a huge decline in plant life. For about that 70-year period between 1926 and 1995, when there were no more wolves in Yellowstone, the deer went bananas. They went crazy. Well, not really crazy, but they had no natural predators. There are a few bears, I guess, around Yellowstone, but they don't hunt deer in large numbers. And so the deer population exploded because there was nothing to naturally eat the deers or hunt the deers, like the wolves, for example. So the deer had previously roamed freely. They had wandered all over Yellowstone. Yellowstone was their kingdom. There was nothing there to threaten them, and so they were just having a great time. But by having a great time and by having a large population of deer, they were eating a lot of plants, and that was starting to really cause problems. It says they were eating to their heart's content. When you do something to your heart's content, you do it as much as you want. So kids might like the summer holiday because they don't have school, so they can watch TV or play video games to their heart's content until they're completely satisfied, and even beyond that, as much as you want, no limits, no rules, as they roamed or kind of wandered freely around, eating whatever they want, never worrying that behind the next tasty bush might be a wolf waiting to eat them. They just did whatever they wanted, and that caused a huge decline or a huge drop or fall in plant life because, of course, we have thousands more deer than we used to have every year. They're all hungry, they're eating lots of plants, and the plants can't keep up, so the deer were really destroying a lot of the flora, the plant life and the flowers and whatnot, because the wolves weren't there to keep the numbers in check.
So it was probably a big problem there, so they had to do something about all the deer there eating all the plant life. So with the wolves' return, however, the deer were forced to avoid certain areas. So the wolves were there, the deer aren't that stupid. They'd see a wolf there and they'd think, well, I better not go over there because that wolf may attack me and kill me and my fawn. I don't want that to happen. So yeah, the deer avoided certain areas because the wolves were there, and I guess as a result, plants had a chance to recover. The plants could grow back.
There you go. As trees and bushes returned, so did birds and beavers. So, of course, this would happen over a few years, over a few different seasons. But as the plants returned in certain areas where they had been destroyed or eaten back so far by the deers, as the plants get a chance to grow again and those areas recover, birds return. So the birds can come back and build their nests in the trees and bushes that they used to use. And beavers come back as well. Beavers, of course, which can control rivers and cause different changes in the local ecology, but very, very beneficial generally. So the beavers return too because they had areas that they had been sort of chased out of by all of those hungry deer. And it says the latter, so that would be the beavers, the latter rely on plant materials in building dams, which also provide homes for many other river creatures. A lot of people know that beavers, well, they don't necessarily eat the trees, but they do cut down trees and then they create large dams. They create blocks in the river made with these trees that they spend many, many hours cutting down and moving around. And these dams that they build can create sort of natural ponds and natural water features in the landscape. And those water features provide homes for other river creatures. So those are places where frogs and salamanders and lizards and ducks and other things can live more peacefully and more safely. So those also would have probably disappeared or reduced in number with the disappearance of the beavers because the deers were eating too much, because the wolves were in there. You see how it's all connected.
Right, so the new plant growth, of course, stabilized the riverbanks. To stabilize just means to make something predictable and regular instead of being erratic and wild and things like that. So the riverbanks were made stable. A riverbank, of course, is the side of the river, and as a result of that, it reduced soil erosion. So again, those riverbanks were probably exposed. The dirt on the riverbanks were exposed, and of course, it rained, and all the dirt would wash into the river, so you'd have all that erosion or decay in the land there. And yes, now that the plants are back, things are returning to normal. Okay, let's move on now to the third and final part of our lesson. We'll listen to it first.
Today, Yellowstone is healthier in plant and animal life than it had been for decades before 1995. The gray wolf's return demonstrates clearly how a single species can have an enormous effect on an entire ecosystem.
第三部分看到动词 demonstrate， 它表示表明、证明、展现、显示。可以说 It is hoped that the experiment will demonstrate the effectiveness of the new drug. 希望这个实验能够证明新药的疗效。也可以说 Ned was unable to demonstrate that he had graduated from college. Ned 无法证明他已经大学毕业。最后看到 ecosystem 这个单字，它是名词，指的是生态系统。举例来说 Pollution can seriously damage the balance of an ecosystem. 污染会严重破坏生态系统的平衡。或者 The forest ecosystem is home to many different plants and animals. 该森林生态系统拥有许多不同的动植物。
Okay, here in the third part it says, Today, Yellowstone is healthier in plant and animal life than it had been for decades before 1995. So if you go to Yellowstone, you might have the chance to see more birds and beavers and bear and deer and even wolves, of course, although it might not be such a great idea to get close to wolves there. There are also bison in the park there. Lots of people like to get close to the bison and take selfies with them, but you got to be careful because those are wild animals. If they don't like something you've done, they'll probably charge at you and gore you.
Yeah, it says the gray wolf's return demonstrates clearly how a single species can have an enormous effect on an entire ecosystem. It is actually quite incredible. I mean, we learn about this from nature documentaries and in science class, but they kind of talk about these keystone species, these sort of animals that the entire ecosystem, the entire natural balance in that environment, in that habitat, it's all based on. And if you remove even one animal, and often it is a large predator like this, but it can also be, frogs or ducks or whatever. If you remove these animals from this whole very delicate system, the whole thing can kind of collapse. Everything can get worse for many species, not just the plants, but the animals too. So this return of the wolf and what they've learned by bringing the wolf back, by reintroducing it, it demonstrates, it clearly shows to us. When you demonstrate something, you teach and you show how something is done or how to do something, often by physically performing it in front of someone. So you're not just reading about it, reading the evidence, you're actually seeing the evidence, you're actually seeing how it works in front of you, which of course for most people is a more efficient way of learning things. So it clearly shows or demonstrates or teaches us how a single species can have an enormous effect on an entire ecosystem, an entire habitat, and all the animals and plants that live in it.
And this, of course, can encourage a discussion of a similar issue here in Taiwan, like the decline of the Formosan black bear or invasive species and things like that. This concept, of course, should be discussed in Taiwan as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分提到，黄石国家公园在20世纪前曾经是数百只灰狼的栖息地，由于极度的捕猎，到了1926年，灰狼已经完全从这座公园消失了。那这边有两个重点，首先课文它用 It was home to ... 来表达黄石国家公园曾是什么什么的栖息地。 Home 当名词，它是指发源地啊、所在地或是栖息地。那我们这边来介绍两种常见的用法。第一种呢，就是课文用法，你可以用 be home to 加名词去表达是什么什么的所在地、栖息地，或是某地拥有什么什么。那这就是用来表达某人或某事物它归属于某地。Home 在这个用法中是不可数名词。而第二个用法是 be the home of 加名词，这是表达为什么的所在地、发源地、栖息地。Home 这时候是可数名词。举例来说， Taiwan is the home of bubble tea. 台湾是珍珠奶茶的发源地。好，那第二个重点是文中它用到 due to 表示因为由于什么什么。 意思就跟 because of 或是 owing to 差不多，那么后面常常会接名词或动名词来说明原因，但这边要注意几个重点。首先是 due to 跟 owing to 是比较正式的用法，那比较常用在正式的公告里，像是政府宣布的消息啊，航空公司宣布可能因为某些缘故而取消了班机之类的。那么 because of 则是在口语当中比较常用的。那第二个要注意的重点是 due to 和 because of 可以接在 be 动词之后来当补语用， owing to 则不行。举例来说， The delay was due to heavy fog， 延误是因为起了浓雾。那么第三个重点是，如果你想在 due to 后面接子句，那必须先加上同位语 the fact， 写作 due to the fact that 主词加动词，可是这其实就会跟 because 接子句意思差不多。好，那我们再看到课文第二部分有一句写到 As trees and bushes returned, so did birds and beavers。 好，我们来看这个句型是 as 加上第一个主词加动词，逗号 so 加上助动词加第二个主词，这是表达说随着第一个主词怎么样怎么样，第二个主词也怎么样也怎么样。那么 as 在这边是当连接词，表达随着在什么的同时，而 so 是当副词，表达也。so 加上助动词加第二个主词可以用来肯定附和前方子句，那特别注意助动词的时态要配合前方子句的动词，那单复数则是配合后方第二个主词的变化。例如 As the weather got worse, so did his mood。 随着天气变差，他的心情也是。那因为前方子句用到过去式，那我们的 so 后面的助动词是用 did 来表达。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Vast. Vast forests cover most of the country's northern and eastern regions. Classify. We are planning to organize these old reports by classifying them by date and type. Endangered. This jungle is home to a variety of endangered plants, so it needs to be protected. Species. Certain penguins and seals are among the species that can survive in extremely cold climates. Decline. Mr. Evans experienced a significant decline in energy as a result of his illness. Demonstrate. The results of the experiment demonstrate how pressure affects gas volume. Ecosystem. Pollution from a nearby factory is thought to have caused serious harm to the local ecosystem.
Discussion Starter starts now!
It's time now for our discussion starter. The question is, what is another species whose introduction or reintroduction to an area had surprising results? What happened?
I would say, and actually it's kind of related, the beaver is a species that was reintroduced, I believe, to Britain, to England. They had a type of European beaver and they were hunted long ago because, of course, they cut down trees, they caused flooding, and a lot of the British countryside have been turned into farmland, and farmers don't like flooded fields. So this led to erosion of the riverbanks, and it led to a loss of habitat for ducks and birds and fish in the rivers and frogs and stuff like that. And so by reintroducing the beaver, they have actually brought life back to several rivers in Britain. And I think this is actually a process that is still happening now. They just reintroduced them a few years ago, but so far, the results have been quite good.
Well, the introduction of starlings in Central Park in the United States was a pretty bad idea. I heard about this many years ago. As you know, starlings are marauders. They're pretty brutal birds, and they probably caused a lot of damage to the local ecosystem in the United States.
No natural predators there.
Yep, indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Mike.
See you next time.